Hello, everyone, and welcome to Osquery Office Hours. Here we are, mid-April, at least in Boston. Climate change has kind of gone weird, and we're going between cold and warm, but that's what we get. Let's see, announcements. Mike from Trail of Bits poked his head in and sent a giant pile of YouTube videos, so I've added them to all the prior minutes. I know many people were looking for that, so thank you, Mike. We pushed 582 to stable, so that's out the door. There's a PR up for the website if anyone wants to thumb it. Zach, I think that's probably just you. Oh, or Charvel. Zach or Charvel can thumb that. That's everything I have for announcements. Other people? Moving on. Next section is sort of a open section. Any questions, issues, PRs anyone wants to discuss? Kind of meant as an open section for anyone who's dropping into office hours. Eric, Chris, I think we've seen you both before, but maybe not in a while. I don't know if there's anything that brings you here today.
It's the first time I've been able to clear this hour in my schedule in months.
From my end, Charvel could probably talk a bit more to the idea behind it, but we have like kind of a proposal for a new feature or an extension of an existing feature.
Sounds like it looks like someone's maybe typing in some agenda items on that, so I suspect it's coming.
Yep, that's me typing that.
Okay, well, in that case, we can simply move on to the thing Charvel's starting to type.
So background on this. This is related to FIM, and when we implemented the endpoint security-based process file events table, we didn't include the open access system call because it has a huge performance overhead, especially on older macOS versions. The newer ones, Apple by default mutes some of its paths, and it's a lot better. But there's still a demand for it, especially for detection. And I know we've kind of toyed around this idea of having like experimental flags or experimental features. So I wanted to know what the thoughts on having an experimental flag that would enable those events. And that flag would have very heavy caveats. Like, hey, this will, unless you like get your paths correct, this will cause like a fire hose of events, and it might cause Osquery to be killed. Sorry, Chris, you were saying something, but you were muted.
Oh no, I wasn't saying anything actually, but I just to like provide a little bit of color around like the detection use cases here. I think on like any given endpoint, and I guess we're focusing on macOS in particular. You typically have a lot of files that reside on disk that end up being really sensitive and really attractive to attackers. If you're an AWS shop, you might have the credentials file there. G-Cloud is the same thing. Your credentials are cached on disk. The keychain is quite often a target for attackers, and having the ability to say, hey, is any application outside of the ones that I would naturally expect to touch these files, trying to access these files, is somebody like actually just catting it or running like copy on it and just moving it somewhere, is like just an invaluable use case and really not covered by most EDR because of like the associated potential performance overhead of monitoring file opens. But really kind of no other tool on the market offers this capability today. And I think if Osquery could do it, it would be like a pretty huge differentiator and kind of a game changer for like detection on the endpoints.
I have some questions. So the use case all makes sense to me, right? This is kind of the purpose of FIM, and to the extent that we don't have it, sounds like it was because of a performance implementation trade-off that was made. So what I don't remember is I think we have similar performance trade-offs that have plagued the Linux process monitoring stuff, and I don't remember how we've resolved it there, if we've just slowly optimized it or if we've exposed configuration surface. So one thing might be to follow, like if we've exposed configuration surface, we could follow that path and then have a consistent sort of thing. Maybe another question is this something like maybe more than experimental, it feels like this would be better as some kind of option near the FIM configuration, right? That paths here and you set access calls here, or if it's something that we could do at the query level, right? You do it when you define the query, it has to be in the FIM configuration. So I guess I'm just sort of digging at how do we expose this optionality in a way that feels comfortable? The use case makes sense to me.
So one kind of requirement for exposing this functionality is this has to be kind of configured before the endpoint security subsystem starts. So either via configuration file or via flag. Once the events have started flowing in, we cannot modify the things that we want to monitor on. It has to be shut down and restarted. We don't have like hot patching basically.
Okay, so it can't be in the SQL.
Yeah, it cannot be in the SQL.
But in theory, it could be in the configuration in a similar way to how, didn't we have file accesses on Linux at some point, or do we?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
So could it be like, it sounds like Seth is saying he's not opposed and he's interested in just what does the configuration look like. Cool. Yeah. And same here. I mean, functionality that folks believe that they can make useful, I'd love to see it here. So let's just try and hammer out a configuration surface that makes sense. I think I'd prefer to go more down the path that Seth is suggesting of putting it into the regular configuration, not calling it experimental, but just documenting that it can have serious performance impacts if there's a reason why it can be done that way. If it has to be done through some other kind of startup flag, then that's fine with me as well.
Well, even if it has to be in a startup flag versus the config file, I still would probably elide configuration. Experimental, right? It's, this isn't like a thing we're testing. It's a thing that like we're going to support, and you can maybe not enable it if you don't want it. Is this a pure Boolean, or do you, or can you like specify a different set of paths that you would monitor for open?
So that kind of brings me to the next point. Ventura introduced newer path APIs. Those APIs are basically, here's a set of paths, only monitor these paths. And that solves all our problems. But those symbols are only present on Ventura. They're not present in Catalina, Big Sur, whatever. For those, it basically, for non-Ventura OSs, there's basically mute these paths set, but it doesn't have a only monitor these paths.
Do you think it makes sense to even allow open events pre-Ventura?
I think so that's on the next thing. I did a tiny bit of POC where those symbols are only present on Ventura, but with DL open, DL sim, I can make sure that it doesn't crash in older things, but I've only tested it like locally. I haven't like ran it through like code sign or notarization or all those gatekeeper checks. But probably, I mean, it's either way, like it's not too much development effort, but if you only limit it to Ventura, maybe that'll force people to upgrade sooner.
I guess where I'm going is all of these proposals sound like they make sense. Like they all sound great. I love it. And I'm just thinking about how do we expose them and build configuration surface that makes sense, right? And if we had talked about how to capture open events 2 years ago, I think we'd have a conversation that was like, okay, I guess we'll put a configuration Boolean. But now that we are looking at saying, well, how do we, Ventura is going to change this. We're going to move to having specific path separators. Maybe we still want that Boolean. I'm just sort of like, sometimes it might be better to say, okay, let's only support open events on Ventura forward. Does that make the configuration surface easier?
It potentially does. And it also kind of, if you remember, we have the file paths block in the configuration, and it also kind of unifies that with the Ventura thing, because we couldn't use the file paths because macOS kind of had this backwards idea of paths muting. So then it's consistent across platforms then also. Like Linux, you use file_paths. macOS, you use file_paths. And so, but that's only possible Ventura forward and not kind of backward.
But even with that, I would imagine you might not want open events on all paths.
Yeah.
Like, can you scope that down and say only open events on some paths? Or is it kind of all or none?
It's a kind of all or nothing. There's hacky ways to do it, but I wouldn't want to do that.
Okay.
At that point, could you do it from the SQL, which is like, let's say like there's a limitation such that you would have to have open or modify events for every path you specify. Could you just like in the SQL, if you only wanted modify events for a certain path, just say like where action is not equal to open or whatever?
Yeah, that works. That currently works as well.
You still push it through the event subsystem though.
Yeah. So there's still
but if you're just doing like
storing it.
Single path monitoring, that's like negligible amount of like events.
Well, I'm imagining, like, you can imagine a site that's like, okay, I want to monitor for changes across all of Etsy and user, but I want open events on key material.
Yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying, like the opposite. Yeah. The inverse. Yeah. I don't know.
I'm kind of game for whatever. I think the way you're describing this, it sounds like we should end up with some Boolean flag that just toggles whether you get all of the open events, and that Ventura probably starts growing specific path stuff. And I kind of imagine you'll have to work through how the configuration is exposed so it feels clean. But I'm in favor of both of these, and I'm happy to argue about configuration surface. And my comment would mostly be that it should feel clean going forward, and I would put more effort into like Ventura, and whatever's next will be more important than whatever's behind us. So
yeah, and the last thing I'd add is consider whether the configuration can adopt from the file accesses type configuration that we have on the Linux vim already. Because as always, it's nice to kind of keep that kind of consistency and the way that Osquery works.
Is that broken out already today? Like for Linux, is there like file paths and file accesses? And
I believe so.
It's been a long time.
Yeah, gotta double check.
There's a single configuration file paths, and that is used as a filter for all the events. So for I notify, the file paths configuration key is used to install the watcher, the notify watchers on the files. So yeah, there's a single configuration.
But you could, in theory, with the way that configuration works, monitor modification for some superset and accesses for some subset of that, right?
Yeah, with the section that you linked there, Chris, it's like you say which of your sections you want also monitored for accesses.
Right. So it just sounds like you couldn't do the inverse, which is like you couldn't
do access, but not
right. And I
Which
think
seems
that's
like the
prob-
less necessary thing to be able to do because of what
Totally
you said,
agree.
Chris.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think in the perfect world, if it could adopt from the way that that works today, I think that would be great.
Sorry, just a question. The pre-Ventura implementation, when you are enabling, so again, when you're enabling the open, let's say syscall,
Doesn't exist right now.
sorry?
The open just isn't enabled right now. It just doesn't exist.
No, I
Oh.
see, but yeah, when you will add
Oh.
this let's say experimental feature, as far as I understood, it will enable it for the whole system, and then you have to filter down to what you have selected through the configuration. Correct?
Yeah.
So even so, does the majority of the overhead comes from Osquery? I would think so, probably, but is the subsystem fast enough to deliver events? Because basically my experience on the audit, our experience on the audit Linux side is that even just enabling the open event it kills everything. Just by, if you do an SSH, it generates thousands and thousands of records. So
Catalina is not there. It's a very naive implementation, but I think Big Sur Forward, Apple itself, unless you explicitly request it, Apple will mute some of its noisier platform binaries and some of the system paths. So that kind of helps, and it's a lot faster in Big Sur as well. And you can also kind of detect dropped events because there's a sequential number attached to each record, which wasn't there in Catalina. But with Catalina, yeah, it'll kind of grind to a halt. And I don't know, it's been a while. I can go back and kind of do a little bit of performance testing as well, spin up a VM and
You
see,
could
but
just,
I don't think anyone would
just
should be
don't
using.
let it happen on Catalina.
That works for me.
Yeah, I mean, remind me what the policy is around supporting unsupported Apple operating systems.
We
Whose
try our
policy?
best.
Yeah, don't hurt yourself, right? If it's not going to work on Catalina, just don't let it happen.
Log a warning, this isn't supported on Catalina, put it in the docs and move on. Yeah, for real. I mean, people can update if they want these kind of things. Let's not put any extra effort into that.
Yeah.
Cool. That's all the agenda items written down.
I got something that I'll bring up.
Yeah.
So the curl table, I know there's been lots of issues around that and discussions of whether it should even exist and blah, blah, blah. But something that we've had folks noticing and causing them trouble with is the fact that if you provide TLS server certs bundle to connect to a remote OS query management server, that cert bundle is also used by the HTTP client and curl, and so causes the curl table to be typically broken if folks are configuring that. Would folks here have an objection to the curl table just always using the default OS query cert bundle and not or the system certs if that's possible, or on platforms where that's possible, and then having TLS server certs work independently?
I would be supportive of decoupling them. I don't use the curl table, so I don't know all the options off the top of my head. I would be supportive of decoupling them, of having a command line option to allow overriding the cert bundle on the curl table, of having a column to do that. Probably worth noting that there's probably at least one person out there who depends on the current behavior, and oh well. But I'm decoupling them makes a lot of sense to me, and then I don't know, and then providing people some way to specify what the allowed certs are also makes sense. And I don't know that I've got opinions about whether it should be a command line or a where clause. I can kind of make interesting arguments both ways. So
Okay, cool. So it sounds like there's not really any hesitations from anyone. So if someone on our team were to bring up a reasonable solution towards this problem, then we'd be willing to move forward.
I think so. I mean, I'd read it. I have a couple things I can mention. One of the Collide people is working on a table that presents an interface to Windows Search, the Windows Search API. This is similar to the MD Find API, but is Windowsy. There's a little bit of weirdness about how to pass pseudo SQL through SQL. So I think we'll end up seeking some input on kind of what that format is. My gut sense is that it's going to come back as an EAV table. But I'm encouraging my coworker to bring that up on Slack. So if people have opinions about maybe what they want to see there, kind of look for something soon. I imagine Marcos does, but I'm not sure anyone else here does. So.
Yeah, so I made some work around using the Windows Search APIs through COM objects in the past, so I might be able to help their question on how to get it things to work together.
Yeah, I think he's got a POC of it working, and now we're just kind of yammering internally about what does the data look like.
Okay.
I'll try and make sure I tag you on review or something, or make sure you see that when it comes through.
Sure.
Anyone want to bring up anything? If not, we can look at some of our standing items. There are a couple of security tickets that Stefano's automation has created. OpenSSL. OpenSSL has 3 vulnerabilities.
Yeah, they're all about special verification. Well, if you're using policies to do some additional verifications of certificates, then there is this CV. I don't think we are using them, but anyway, updating OpenSSL, it's pretty easy, so it makes sense to do.
Mm-hmm. I hope that at some point you'll just pick that up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can open up API today. I mean, this is, well, sort of lower priority, but if I can suggest, there is PR 7984. We have the AArch64 runner that is not working since a week or so. just because the Ubuntu runner that it was using has been fully deprecated. So that updates the runner plus updates the README because the badge
will
was
review it.
pointing to, yeah. But anyway, the PR
Sorry,
has
I
the
was
information.
kind of out of the world last week, but I'll review this PR for you.
Oh yeah, no problem. In the end, yeah, it only ran on master. So
Yeah. There are a handful of other PRs that looked maybe worth revisiting, talking about, bringing up now. So there is this, there's 7956, which is about process arguments into vectors. Sounds like a performance. It was not the right URL. I'm so sorry. That thing. If anyone has views about that.
I can take a look at this one. Just
Cool.
looking into it. Yeah.
I will assign it to you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Another one that maybe seems worth talking about here is Marcos's PR 7974 about list directories. Because I think Mike, to me it seemed like that's a thing that maybe we should just do everywhere. It sounded like Stefano was kind of agreeing with that. So
Yeah, I was planning to put together some testing for this one, just to make sure that we are covering those scenarios where junctions and symlinks are properly handled by this new logic. But yeah, I think that's the only thing pending here.
yeah, did we settle on whether to move that into the util function and just replace it everywhere, or can we even just replace the existing implementation across all the OSs?
oh, I would do so. I think yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
Does it change the way that files that start with a dot are handled? Because I know there's always been some strangeness about that. Though, in fact, people were just complaining in the Slack about how they want the files to show up that are start with a dot. So if it does that, then maybe it's also desirable.
I don't think there shouldn't be an issue actually. If there was an issue, that method that Marcos is using will fix it, because it is just looping the directories, while the other method would use the file glob custom function, which then uses a pattern and does pattern matching on the entries. So that would have the chance to skip by name files that start with a dot. So
right.
Is that the macOS one, Zach? The FS events one? That's skipping the dot thing? I think that might be an API limitation, or
I think it's
it
like
was the files table.
The file table. If
file
you
table,
pull everything in a directory, you miss the dot files unless you I forget if you can specify them explicitly or use path, path dot wild card. Whether this is good or bad is an open question, but it frequently trips people.
That's a separate issue because the file table uses the globbing mechanism. So yeah.
Yeah, so I think if we replace that command with Marcos's implementation here, maybe we would start just including the dots, which might confuse people, but I think that's okay because it feels somehow better to me today.
It will not fix the file table though. So that function only lists directories, and it's used on those tables that internally know that they want a list of directories. For the file table, it's more generic, and so it uses the other implementation, which accepts a pattern.
Oh well,
So-
still worth doing.
Yeah, eventually, but this one will not fix it. Yeah. So.
Marcos, do you have next steps for this PR? I'm where we're going?
Yeah, the next step will be to create an integration test, I guess, to put so you can run on the CI and make sure that it works fine on Windows, and I will see if I can make it to work on Windows and Mac OS too. We
Cool.
can have a test that cover all platforms.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got general support for just fixing it everywhere. So
Yeah.
cool. Are there any other PRs? One of my coworkers wrote a implementation to gather connected displays. I feel like that's probably something that some Mac-ish person should review. Charbel,
I can
me,
take a look. Yep.
I'll tag you.
7946.
Yeah, 7946. I left a few early comments, but I feel like I want to bounce that to someone else. We talked about this one. Anything looking exciting to people? Marcos, I know you said you were looking at the Windows ARM 64 one already.
Yeah. On that one, I was able to test the binary using a Raspberry Pi. So I didn't have like an ARM 64 device at hand, so I ended up using a Raspberry Pi running Windows 10, and that worked well. So it just wanted to confirm that that the binary is working well. I tried a few tables, even the DTW table, and it's working fine. I
Okay.
think on that PR, the only thing pending is the CI comments that Stefano mentioned on the PR.
Well, they implemented the CI jobs already. Should we merge it?
I think that there was a missing. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so there is at least one library that has not been configured, or a configuration for the original build system has not been created. And then I asked for some notes about how each library has been configured with the original build system. So yeah, the author agreed to do that work, and this week should happen. It should happen, I think. So
Okay, so it sounds like we're broadly happy. It seems to work. None of the code changes look really scary to me. And it sounds like maybe Stefano is playing a little bit of whack-a-mole on dependencies, and that it sounds like it's pretty close to being mergeable.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you both. I appreciate it because anyone want to bring up anything else? Anyone want to talk about anything?
For the connected displays, I know we made exceptions in the past. My only caveat would be we are linking to a private framework, and not using any APIs, just using the symbols. But yeah, I'll take a deeper look.
I don't have
think
opinions here.
we've relatively often linked private frameworks in the past.
I think the Wi-Fi table is the only one that does it off
Is
the
it?
top
Okay.
of my head.
Or maybe not linked, but like dynamically loaded.
Dynamically loaded
symbols.
it in. Yeah.
Okay. So is that the difference that
That-
here we're actually linking the framework rather than trying to dynamically load?
Could we dynamically load it instead?
Yeah. No, I just wanted to bring it up. This approach seems okay. This is what we have done in the past. We can actually link the whole framework. So in case there are like future changes to any symbols, it won't, the chances of it crashing at runtime are lower.
So looking very briefly, just looking for private frameworks in our source code, I see a handful of them. And I don't have opinions about whether we should be linking or dynamically loading, or that's not a thing I have opinions about. But we do link to admin framework, mobile keybag, disk management, package kit, Skylight, TCC. So adding this one doesn't feel like it's a big step to me, given that. But then I don't know if there's a preferred or a less preferred way to bring it in. So if you feel like it should be a dynamic load versus I don't know. I don't know what these words mean. So all of those are good, reasonable feedback on the PR.
Got it.
The endpoint security stuff links in private frameworks.
Does it? I'm sure it, like, Apple does it for us, but
Osquery events Darwin endpoint security.h links system library private framework Skylight and
Skylight is the analytics one.
and TCC.
Yeah.
So yeah, but whatever you think makes sense. Other stuff? If not, maybe we end it a little bit early. Okay. Well, wonderful to see everyone and various guests who have already departed. And nice to see all the fun things people are planning. So
Totally. Thanks, Al. Have a great rest of your
Thank you,
week.
guys.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.